Good afternoon and welcome to this special little newsy episode of the Hearthstone Half Hour. I'm Hammy, this is FailCraft Casts. Hope you're well and good. So there has been the news that dropped at about 1 AM last night UK time, so that's a reasonable time in the afternoon US time, of course, where the Hearthstone dev team is based. So news, the last change before the World Championships in terms of balance. This change will go through with the patch on the 22nd of September, so you hunters there still have got pretty much a week, maybe a week and a couple of days to get going with your starving buzzard and similar. But there's going to be a couple of changes. So what we're going to do in this video episode stream is just very quickly run through these on a really top line change. So if you're a new to intermediate-ish player, you will probably see patch notes come out and you will wonder, oh, what does this mean? What does this mean to me? You'll see probably a lot of very smart people, smarter than me, who understand the detail a bit more, going through it in terms of balance changes in particular decks. But let's go through this from a fairly basic perspective and go through what these patch notes mean, what they might mean to you. So the changes are to a couple of cards that you, if you've laddered at all, or maybe in your casual mode games when you've been experimenting, you'll see them come up. One of them, a basic, the Starving Buzzard, integral to hunters and the way they play. The other, Leroy Jenkins, so Leroy, a legendary, but also prevalent in a lot of decks. You will see Leroy pop up in a whole bunch of places. So let's first have a chat about what these cards do from a new to sort of intermediate player perspective, in case you're not familiar with them. And plenty of new Hearthstone players joining. We'll then chat through what the changes are, and then thirdly we'll wrap up with what those changes might actually mean for you or for players who are playing these decks. So that'll be the three bits that we'll jump into in terms of analysing what these changes mean. Okay, so first up, let us jump in. So we'll jump into game and we will just sit in the home of all card tweakers and hopefully your home as well, my collection. And we'll go and have a look at number one, Starving Buzzard. So what does Starving Buzzard do right now? Bear in mind that this is the Starving Buzzard before the patch changes go through. So Starving Buzzard is a cheap basic card. It's a hunter basic you can get from leveling up. And whenever you summon a beast, you draw a card. That is Starving Buzzard. It doesn't sound too complicated, no? Well, the reason that is so good, if you have not played against a hunter deck, or maybe if you've not played as a hunter deck, Starving Buzzard, if you feed him, he loses his whole identity. He's no longer a starving buzzard. He's just a normal buzzard. Very, very true. So, summoning a beast, drawing a card. Well, firstly, look at the mana cost. For the mana cost 2-drop, he's 2 attack, 1 health. He will probably perish if you just throw him down. But the Starving Buzzard is generally always used in terms of hunter comboing. So to understand why Starving Buzzard is so awesome, let's take a real quick look for you new players at hunters. If you're experienced, do bear with us for a minute or two. We are doing a little bit of a new player perspective. So look at hunters, the hunter deck mechanics, whether you play as it or against it. Beast, look at all of the hunter specific cards. Beast, 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 Starving Buzzard himself or herself. Animal Companion, Summon a Beast, 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 Houndmaster, Beast. And then all of the neutral beasts that are awesome and go with a hunter deck too. So hunters run off beasts. Don't forget Unleash the Hounds. This is why Buzzard gets so much play. If you fill up your board against a hunter and you have loads of minions, creatures on your side of the table, you will get a hunter saying, right, hey, 2 mana Starving Buzzard, and then Unleash the Hounds for 3. For 5 mana, they will get as many hounds, but also as many card draws as you have minions on the table. And that is Hunter's strength in a nutshell. That is Starving Buzzard's strength and a very strong mechanic. What that will let a hunter do is fill up their hand with loads of cards and also have a whole bunch of beasts on the table that they can use. The hounds, they can then buff those hounds with things like, for example, Timberwolf. Your other beasts have 1 attack. They can drop other things that will also buff the attack of their beasts. So that is why Starving Buzzard is played and why it is good. Secondly, let's go and have a look at the change. What is the actual change going to be? Well, Starving Buzzard is being tweaked quite significantly, and it is going up to 5 mana, up from 2, and it's now got 3 attack and 2 health. So 5 mana, 3 attack and 2 health. What is that going to mean? Well, 5 mana, obviously that is a massive, massive step change. You're not going to be able to play it too cheaply. Instead of playing that with Unleash the Hounds for 5 mana, it's now going to cost 8. And then 3 attack and 2 health, well, its stats are low, for the mana cost. Remember that we can drop things like Acidic Swamp Ooze that are 2 mana, 3 attack and 2 health. There are plenty of cards that are 2 mana, 3 attack and 2 health. So now that with its 3 attack and 2 health, it's really out of sync with the mana cost that it has. And then also it's really weighted for the ability. So whenever you summon a beast, draw a card will stay the same. And really, even though it's really saying that, you know what, for 3 extra mana, you get whenever you summon a beast, draw a card. So Starving Buzzard is really going to be a lot more situational. It's not going to be quite as prevalent. People will still play it in the late game. And to be fair, when you play against a hunter, you generally in the late game, if a hunter is playing Starving Buzzard into Unleash the Hounds in the early game, it's either because you filled your table too full with minions to start with, or because that hunter for some reason is a bit desperate to remove something. So they may well be trying to get rid of an early game advantage you have. Maybe you've dropped a big minion that they want to get rid of, or similar. So for those reasons, it can be, I wouldn't say unusual, but if you're playing into a hunter's strong points, then if at turn 5 or turn 4, if they've got a coin, they're dropping Starving Buzzard and Unleash the Hounds, then typically speaking, you have played too many minions probably too early. So making this combo 8 mana, maybe 7 if you've got a coin, if you save it that late in the game, there will still be hunters who will still be packing these cards to use them in the late game, but it will certainly make it a bit more situational. So if you're playing with a low amount of minions on your table in the late game, you're not vulnerable to the Unleash the Hounds part of it, but they may still be playing a Buzzard into a Beast to get that additional card draw. 3 attack and 2 health. Really in the late game, 2 health is tiny, and it's not going to make Buzzard any less removable. People may gun for it a bit less, and it will just come out a lot later in the game. So a lot of hunters, it will have to make them maybe rethink a bit about how they play those cards, but it certainly won't, I think, end the use of it completely. It really slows the use of Buzzard down, but it's not going to remove it completely. Because if you think about it, a lot of the time I would probably say people are going to be, you know, you could be buzzarding into cheap beasts in the early game. So, say for example, if you take the Stone Tusk Ball, let's just grab that. It's 1/1/1 and charge. So really then, unless you're using Unleash the Hounds to, when your opponent's got a lot of minions on the table, trigger a lot of beast summons to draw all of those cards, then you can still play a Starving Buzzard for 5 and then drop things like Stone Tusk Boar, maybe Animal Companion and similar cards, but it's not going to be quite as efficient or give you the ludicrous or very strong amount of draw that it did before for that 5 mana. So that is the change to Starving Buzzard. We've taken a look at why it's kind of pretty good in the existing sort of way, what the change actually is, and then had a little bit of a chat thirdly about how that might affect some of the decks and use of that card. So in conclusion, we'll put a crimp in hunters who rely on this for card draw. We'll certainly give hunters a lot less draw. If you take a look at comparable cards, so Sprint costs 7 mana. If you take a look at a rogue card, it's not comparable, but let's look at other card drawing options that some of the people have. So Arcane Intellect for the mage, for pure draw power, that is pretty much pay 3, draw 2. If we take a look at Sprint, class specific options we're looking at here rather than general ones, then Sprint is 7 mana, draw 4. And really, for Unleash the Hounds, it could be, depending on how many minions your opponent has on the table, let's say draw 3 or 4 cards for 5 mana, and you also get the charging hounds as well. You also get those minions on the table. So it's kind of the table control that that combo gave you, as well as the high mana efficiency of it. So will it remove the use of Starving Buzzard completely? No, I don't think so. But it will become more situational, it will become more late game, and if we take a look at Blizzard's intentions, that's always interesting. Outside of my analysis, Buzzard, the amount of cards Starving Buzzard allowed hunted players to draw ultimately ended up being too excessive for its low cost. Yeah, okay, that's true if you didn't play into it. And some decks, of course, it does discourage you from playing a lot of minions on your side of the table against a hunter. And I know that Blizzard also don't like that. They didn't mention that ultimately. But I know that Blizzard don't like, they like people playing minions on the table. They've said that previously in patch notes, in dev interviews and in some tweets. They do like people trying to use the most of what they have available to them rather than feeling too restricted in any particular way. That seems to be a play style thing they like for Hearthstone. Also in the Blizzard post by Zariah, this change will allow Hunter's opponent more time to react to both the Buzzard and the cards drawn by its power. That's true, on top of what we've already discussed. And I also think that the bit that's unsaid by Blizzard there is that not only does Starving Buzzard, Unleash the Hounds or similar give you a lot of card draw potentially for low cost, but it also gives you that table control. So really that will restrict the hunter's table control or table options to maybe a bit later in the game as well. You can still play Unleash the Hounds, but you're not going to get the additional benefit of drawing all of those cards early in the game, for example. So you can have the cards and the table control later in the game if the situation demands it. So Starving Buzzard becoming, I think, a lot more situational. Righty then, that is our little analysis of the Buzzard change. Next up, we're going to take a look at Leroy. Black Cat Hamlet says, I think the Buzzard Nerf is quite extreme, going from 2 to 5. Maybe they should make the Hounds somehow without beast status instead. That's an interesting point. Maybe let's have a quick look at Unleash the Hounds. Oh yeah, if you summon a 1/1 Hound with charge, if you remove the beast status, because remember the Hound that is summoned is a beast, and that is why the cards get drawn with Starving Buzzard. So yeah, if you made the Hounds not beasts anymore, it's kind of I call it quite a spiritual is the wrong word because it's not religious, but the sort of the feeling of a hunter deck and wanting to, you know, draw beasts or use beasts like you do in World of Warcraft and within the Worldcraft universe. A Hound feels like a beast. So if those Hounds weren't beasts anymore, what would they be? It's kind of a sort of, it's more of a one for sort of how hunters should feel that, as much as it is trying to discourage the two being played together. So if Blizzard haven't considered that, I think that would probably be the reason why. As well as the fact that Unleash the Hounds has been tinkered with so much because it's a powerful card. So this combo has never really been going away, and I'm sure that there will be tweaks to it still. So that is Buzzard. Next up, we're going to take a look at Leroy Jenkins. So, okay, again, for you new to intermediate players, if you've not seen Leroy, then we'll quickly review him. I don't think he needs a huge amount of introduction, but Leroy Jenkins at the moment. So firstly, what's Leroy at the moment? What is the change? How will it affect his play and use? Leroy is a legendary. You will see him dropped in everything from late game Warlock decks through to some Hunter decks through to the nefarious Zoo Warlock early game Rush deck. What is Leroy? Leroy for 4 mana gives you 6 attack for 2 health. So he has a charge. It means you can drop him. He'll do damage and battle cry, summoning 2 1/1 whelps. Now that summon of 2 1/1 whelps, obviously that is meant to give your opponent the 2 damage to be able to destroy him. However, when Leroy hits the table, generally he's used on, also let's not forget his use in the sort of Miracle Rogue deck. He can be used, thrown down, and he can be comboed with so many cards. So if you throw down Leroy and then throw down a buff, let's say a Paladin Blessing of Kings, a Paladin Blessing of Might, a Rogue Cold Blood, even Druid, you know, bits and bobs and buffs. Of course, let's not forget that Druids can buff too, but primarily Paladins and Rogues, let's say, or in a Zoo Warlock as another card with charge on top of demons and similar things. So Leroy is used as a cheap mid to late game finisher. He will come in, and if you combo him with cards, then he can become obscenely powerful. The Miracle Rogue deck can make Leroy do, say, 20 in a turn. Play Leroy, buff him, attack, return him to hand with the Shadow Step card, play him again for a reduced mana cost, buff him, obscene damage. Leroy Jenkins, the finisher in Miracle Rogue, pretty much. We can then take a look at Zoo Warlock. Come in, if you're throwing stuff into your opponent's face with a rush, then Leroy can come in and do that damage. So a cheap, efficient finisher, and although he does summon those 2 1/1 whelps, he's not always quite so removable. If you play into it well with a Leroy, then you will have a solution to make sure your opponent, if you haven't killed your opponent in one go, finish them off, then you want a solution generally, and a lot of decks do have a solution to make sure that they can get rid of those 2 1/1 whelps, or they play Leroy at a time where they can remove the whelps, and therefore Leroy might even get a second swing in if he's not being comboed for a finisher. So what is the change? That's what Leroy is for you newer to intermediate players. What is the change? Well, Leroy is going to cost 1 more mana. Now that sounds insignificant, but if we take a look at 5 rather than 4, there are some decks that quite affects. So Leroy costing 5 rather than 4 will make him come out slower in a rush deck, and particularly the Miracle Rogue deck that we mentioned, where all sorts of cards get comboed with Leroy, Cold Blood and Shadow Step primarily, but also others. That additional mana makes him just that 1 more mana expensive to play. So it effectively means that it won't remove his play from Miracle Rogue, but it will make him a little bit slower. and make it generally hard to do quite so much damage in one go. So I think primarily it's not going to affect Leroy's use hugely in some ways as a sort of early to mid game additional finishing card. It will mean that he comes out one turn more slowly, but really what it will mess up is if people try and combo Leroy with multiple stamps, and indeed that's the Blizzard logic. So if we're going to have a look at the Blizzard sort of patch notes or forum posts, Leroy created a strategy that revolved around trying to defeat your opponent in one turn without requiring any cards on the board. Fighting for board control and battles between minions makes an overall game of Hearthstone more fun and compelling. Taking 20 damage in one turn is not particularly fun or interactive. So that is kind of like if we look at Starving Buzzard. They like people fighting for board control. They like battles between minions. They don't necessarily like it swinging too much one way or another. You know, the Unleash the Hound strategy discourages you from playing minions against Hunter. Similarly, playing Leroy and clearing the board and playing Leroy. Blizzard talking about 20 damage in one turn here. This was occurring when Leroy was used in combination with other cards like Power Overwhelming, Warlock decks, Faceless Manipulator, any deck because it's a neutral minion, Cold Blood, Shadow Step. There we go for the rogues, and Unleash the Hounds, yes, absolutely. So that is the Hunter dropping into a Leroy for an execute. So that will slow it down a bit. It's not going to stop people comboing with those cards. People can still play all of those cards, but remember, with Faceless Manipulator, I believe, is 5 mana. So Leroy and Faceless can only happen you know, turn 10 onwards, basically, or turn 9 if you have a coin. Cold Blood and Shadow Step, those have relatively low costs, but it will just mean maybe, I think, that you can only play Leroy twice in a turn instead of 3 times, because you could Leroy, then Leroy with his mana cost, because of course Shadow Step brings the mana cost from, used to bring the cost from 4 down to 2. So Leroy is going to be a bit slower. Let's just take a quick look, just so I'm not giving you false infos, to illustrate this rogue point. So Leroy and Shadow Step, return a friendly minion to your hand, it costs 2 less. So I could Leroy for 4 mana. I could then attack for 6. I could return him to my hand. I could then play him for 2 mana. I could return him to my hand, and then I could play him for 2 mana. So I could play 3 Leroys in one turn. Pardon me. So I could play 3 Leroys if I had 2 Shadow Steps. So that would be 18 damage in one turn. Leroy, Shadow Step, Leroy, Shadow Step, Leroy. So now, can I play him thrice? Well, for 5 mana, I can play Leroy, Shadow Step, Leroy. But that additional mana makes him, even if I had 2 Shadow Steps in hand, I can play him for 5 and I'm playing for 3, and then I can't play him again. So that immediately reduces a Leroy with 2 Shadow Steps from 18 damage down to 12, and similar things. So there we go. So that is the miracle combo for Miracle Rogue that people also talk about. And then also, if we just take a quick look at Cold Blood, give a minion 4 attack. This is decreasing the damage output of that particular combo, and it will affect some of the other combos as well. But primarily, you'd see Leroy and Miracle Rogue, and it will slow him down as a finisher in other decks. So there we have it. That is what Leroy does. For you sort of newer to intermediate players. That's a little bit about what the change is, and that's a little insight, and it's only a little insight into some of the practical effects of what it will do. You can see there that instead of playing 3 Leroy, for example, 3 times on a time with 3 times on one turn with 2 Shadow Steps, you can only play them twice, and that will give people a bit more time to react. Warlock, I think it's worth just taking a quick look at Power Overwhelming. Give a friendly minion 4/4 to an end of turn, and it dies horribly. Well, look. If you had 2 Power Overwhelmings in hand, let's go for an extreme scenario. That's 4 mana for Leroy plus 4/4. You can still swing for 14 damage with Leroy if you manage to be lucky and get 2 Power Overwhelmings. It's just going to turn out an extra turn later, and it's just going to have to cost an additional mana. So it will be 10/7 rather than 10/6, or 10/6 rather than 10. You know, similarly, if you had a coin, you could Leroy into 2 powers. On turn 6. So there's just a few different examples. Let's just have a quick look. Before we end this little bit of news and review, let's just have a quick look at chat points and see what people think in the chat. Black Hamlet says, as for Leroy, if he can be used in combos anymore, would that make the Rocketeer more useful than him? Well, let's take a look at the Rocketeer. That's a good question. Rock. Elector and Gifton, hey, Rock. Okay, the Reckless Rocketeer. So, would that make the Reckless Rocketeer more useful? Well, there's an argument that says yes, because the Reckless Rocketeer no longer has the downside. Leroy's downside is that he spawns 2 whelps. Now, sometimes Leroy's downside is not too bad, in that if you fill your opponent's board with whelps, they need to kill the whelps before they can play other cards. But those whelps are designed to slow Leroy down. So the Reckless Rocketeer, yeah, actually, you may see people just playing Leroy. Does it make him completely redundant? So he's not redundant per se, but it does give people now a cheap alternative to a Leroy for sure. And indeed, you may see people playing that with no downside as well. So am I going to disenchant Leroy? Ooh, I don't know. I crafted him. I would like to keep him, but maybe I'll disenchant him, and maybe we'll give it a go. So there's nothing wrong actually with playing the Rocketeer instead. If you compare the two straight up, it doesn't invalidate the legendary, but it certainly doesn't have the 2 minion spawn downside that Leroy has. So yeah. Oh, sorry, there is one difference. Leroy costs 1 mana less still. So that's a fairly big difference. So yeah, it is worth keeping Leroy if that 1 mana difference is going to make the difference. And in a lot of rush decks, it may well do. Okie dokie, so that is our little review, and we'll just take a look at another comment, see what you folks are saying. Elideta says, Leroy is a good finisher, but so much charge cards, I just feel like the Miracle combo is very overpowered. Yeah, Miracle is a very, very strong use case. So it'll be interesting to see how people tweak and adapt and do similar. So very, very cool. So for those folks who are live, don't go away. We're going to be streaming onwards a bit in a sec. But for those of you watching on YouTube or similar, that is it for our little review of a little news update, a little look at the upcoming 22nd of September changes for Leroy Jenkins and Starving Buzzard. So if you are a hunter and you want to be laddering away, if you're rushing in with Leroy, you've still got a good week. You know, this is going to be the last change as well, Blizzard have said, before the BlizzCon and Hearthstone World Championships. So if you're on YouTube or an archive, thanks very much for tuning in. You can spot us live on twitch.tv/FailCraft Cast. Timings in the bottom left there for the evenings, and we'll also stream some lunchtimes UK time. Just keep an eye on @FailCraft Cast on Twitter, because we will always tweet when we're going to be going live. So if you're in a different time zone, different part of the world, keep an eye on them. You can come and find us live sometime, hopefully. YouTube, we have over 100 Hearthstone half hours, bits of news, fun bits of video, and other stuff going on. But do check out youtube.com/FailCraftCast. Let us know what you think. And then last but not least, website failcraft.org. And you can find other bits and bobs there, as well as things that don't live so well, that don't live so well in our video, but we also do deck lists and similar things as well. So thank you so much for tuning in. If you are on YouTube, if you're live, don't go away. But above all, do give us a shout. If you like it, share it. We love seeing our stuff shared. And if you think we can improve, please let us know what we can do. So thanks very much for tuning in. If you're on YouTube, if you're on Twitch, don't go away. But either way, hope you're well and take it easy.